When people think of the term ranch, they might think of the Hidden Valley or perhaps the Blink-182 hit album Dude Ranch. But today we're going to be talking about a different kind of ranch, the Skinwalker kind of ranch. I'm Aidan Mattis, and welcome to the Lore Lodge. Skinwalker Ranch was built sometime around the 1930s by a family that we're really not going to get into, because the one that matters is the Sherman family, who bought the building in the 1980s and lived there for a little while before eventually selling it off to billionaire Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow is a billionaire who has always been very interested in the paranormal, so he put together a team called the National Institute for Discovery Science. This team was made up of top scientists, biologists, paranormal researchers, who were all skeptics. And he wanted this because if he ever did discover something that was truly paranormal in nature, he didn't want anybody to be able to chalk it up to a bunch of people who already believed in that stuff, just confirming their biases. So when he purchased Skinwalker Ranch, he brought a whole bunch of people who didn't believe in what he was talking about down to investigate with him. The Sherman family, who had owned the ranch until selling it to Bigelow, were allowed to stay on, partly to manage the ranch, and also just to maintain their source of income as a family. So today I'm going to go through some of the Sherman's experiences, what the National Institute for Discovery Science was able to find, and how the US government ended up getting involved with all of this around the year 2007. The first thing that the Shermans noticed when they arrived at the property was one day they had their cattle out, and out of nowhere appeared this giant wolf, and it went over and started attacking one of the calves. And no matter what they did, they shot the wolf, they hit it with axes. You know, these guys are ranch hands. They're sturdy people. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty. And these cattle are their livelihood. So they go out and they try to get the wolf off. They can't do it. After a period of time, the wolf seems to get bored with what it's doing. It runs off into the woods. And then when they go to track it down later, they find that the tracks just disappear. Completely out of the blue, nowhere to be found. One of the pieces of lore surrounding skinwalkers is, of course, that they can shapeshift into animals. They don the pelt of a wolf, a coyote, even a dog, and then they turn into generally an oversized version of that animal. The next thing that the Shermans noticed that was completely out of place was that all of the doors in the house, even the interior doors that just led between rooms, had deadbolts on them. And if you've ever been in a house, you probably know that's unusual. But they just spent a lot of money on this ranch, they were excited to be there, so they didn't let these two instances freak them out all that much. But things started to get worse over time. They would notice that they could hear people tapping on their windows at night. There were strange orbs and lights floating around in the woods. And in fact, at one of these instances, Terry Sherman, the owner of the ranch, was sitting out on the porch with his dogs, and he saw a blue orb floating about in the wilderness, and he let his dogs run in the woods after it, thinking maybe they'll be able to scare it off. And what ended up happening was they were in there for a little bit, and then he heard his dog start yelping, and then when he went to investigate the next morning, because he was scared shitless, he just went out, and where he found his dogs to have gone, there were just 3 piles of ashes. He had no idea what had done it, but something had simply vaporized the dogs. One of the other strange instances was when Terry's children reported seeing glowing orange orbs floating around, which when you looked into them, you could see blue skies at night, you could see planes out in some sort of other place, and they would watch as 7-foot tall, black, dark beings without faces would crawl their way out of these portals and then walk off into the wilderness. Some of the other strange instances included one of their calves showing up at the top of a tree, 70 feet in the air. There was an auger that Terry would use to dig fence posts that also ended up somehow inexplicably in a tree. At another point in time, they had 4 bulls that were sitting in a pen, and they drove past it, and when they came back a little while later, all 4 of the bulls were in the trailer next to the pen, which it would have been hard enough to get the bulls into the trailer in the first place, but to do it in the 30 minutes it took between seeing them in the pen and seeing them in the trailer is just straight up impossible. And then you need to place all of these odd happenings in the context that this area was known for UFO sightings in the decades before the Shermans arrived at the ranch. So there's been weird stuff happening at Skinwalker Ranch for 40 or 50 years by the time NIDS gets there, And then NIDS spends a few years at the ranch only to confirm that they can't explain through scientific means anything that's happening at Skinwalker Ranch. It's just a hotbed of paranormal activity. Apart from the bits about UFOs that began springing up in the 1950s, there's even more Native American lore to the Yintah Basin, the area surrounding Skinwalker Ranch. You see, back in the 1800s, before it became a federally protected Native American reservation under Abraham Lincoln, the area was the site of a war between the Utes and the Navajo, and the Navajo were losing the war. Part of the problem was that as European settlers arrived in the area, they would buy slaves from the Native Americans. So the natives would be selling each other into slavery when they won wars, because it was just a good way to not only defeat your enemy, but also make a buck in the process. So when the Utes moved in, they started taking Navajo slaves and selling them to the Spanish, to the Americans, to the French, anyone they could in the area who was willing to buy native slaves. Rather than staying to fight the war since they were losing so badly, the Navajo instead decided to curse the land with a Skinwalker curse. So the entire area would become the domain of these Skinwalker witches, who, as I've mentioned in my other videos, are human beings who use dark magic to transform into predatory animals like coyotes, wolves, dogs. Part of the belief in Navajo culture is that skinwalkers become skinwalkers partially through a ritual involving the consumption of human flesh. So on top of shape-shifting witches, they're actually shape-shifting cannibal witches. And you can understand why nobody would want to be around there. And to this day, the ranch borders on a Native American reservation that the Utes refer to as the Path of the Skinwalker, this border area. And so they won't go on it. They won't touch that land. But the Europeans will. They don't mind. They don't believe in the Skinwalkers. So for a long period of time, prior to any sightings of UFOs or any of the Skinwalker Ranch stories, the natives of the area have believed that the land is cursed, that you can't go there, that you will be taken by the Skinwalkers, and they will do what they will with you. So in the beginning I said I was going to go chronologically, and clearly that's not happening. So let's just dive into the next piece I find interesting about this. The United States government getting involved in 2007. The United States government developed a program called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, and this was meant to investigate UFOs. It was created under the direction of then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who somehow, if you go back to all of the Podesta emails that were released in 2016, what you'll find is that Harry Reid was talking to Tom DeLonge from Blink-182, and that essentially Tom DeLonge was telling Harry Reid that he would endorse Hillary Clinton if Hillary Clinton agreed that if she was elected, she would reveal the details about the aliens. I'm just going to give you a second. I'm just going to give you a second to process that. If the US government decided to spend money to research the happenings at Skinwalker Ranch, you can bet there was probably something going on there. The United States government loves to run secret research programs and not tell people about it. And to this day, the government is still running tests and sort of shadowing whatever is going on at Skinwalker Ranch. That includes the current documentary that's being produced by Hulu. And as a result of government interference in that documentary, you can imagine that you're only going to find out what they're okay with you knowing. Now, is Skinwalker Ranch, for some reason, the home to all these UFO sightings? Are there government tests going on? Is it actually skinwalkers? Is the military developing some sort of weird portal technology? Well, I'm going to go into each and every one of those things, and we're going to investigate for the rest of this video what might actually be going on at Skinwalker Ranch. The first thing to address is the giant wolf that appeared on the Sherman's property when they first moved in. Does it fit with Skinwalker lore? Well, based on what they said about it, they used standard firearms, they used axes, and nothing they did to it could hurt it, and then it suddenly just disappeared. Some Skinwalker lore suggests that they can travel via the astral plane, that they can not only astral project, but they can leave this dimension and step into another one at will. And that doesn't fit with necessarily all of the lore, but it's still an interesting little facet of it that you need to take into account when you think about these things. So in an area known as Skinwalker Ranch, is it likely that there were skinwalkers trotting around? Yeah, I would say so. So we're going to chalk that one up as probably a skinwalker. The next one I'll address is something that happened with the cows there. So occasionally, calves and full-size cows both would, after being sighted just seconds earlier, disappear. Sometimes it would be a few minutes, sometimes it would be closer to an hour, but these calves, these cows, would simply go missing and then reappear where they were left minutes earlier, completely dissected. But there wouldn't be blood. It would be as if somebody took the cow, brought it somewhere else, performed some sort of autopsy on it, and then just put it back where it was. And there's a few theories on where that comes from. Some involve aliens and UFOs. Maybe something abducted the cow, took it up into the spacecraft, cut it open, putzed around with its parts for a little bit, and then put it back down. Now, the veterinarians brought in by NIDS said that this was a professionally performed surgery. They believed that this could not have been done in the field without anybody knowing. It was completely impossible. Another possibility is that it ties in with one of the other strange occurrences, which is those portals opening up and the kids seeing them and saying, I see blue skies on the other side of that. It's nighttime. What's going on? Well, perhaps the black figures that they were seeing going in and out of the portal were some sort of supernatural entity. Maybe we are talking about skinwalkers who are opening portals between dimensions and stepping in and out. One of the other possibilities, though, is that it's secret government technology, that we have, in fact, found a way to create portals between places on Earth, and that those black figures maybe were people in suits that were meant to protect them during the journey, and perhaps the cows were being put through the portals to see what would happen to a body when you put it through that kind of stress. And they did the autopsies to determine if there was internal damage when something organic went through. You know, perhaps you want to send a division of soldiers through a portal and into Tehran or Moscow, and you want to make sure that when you send them through, they're not going to have all sorts of internal radiation damage or something. So you test it on a cow first, and then you send people through in protective suits that you have discovered are necessary, something along those lines. That might be one explanation for why these tall black figures didn't have faces. It could have been some sort of protective mask, maybe. And of course, this is getting deep into conspiracy theory territory, but you know, it's worth it to look at all the possibilities. And then there's the floating blue orbs. These come across to me, considering that they float around and they can supposedly release enough direct energy to turn a living being to ashes, as some sort of perhaps a direct energy weapon, maybe a drone that was flying around and would send direct bolts of lightning at things in order to vaporize them in an instant. You know, what all of this fits with is the idea that maybe the government is using the paranormal reputation of Skinwalker Ranch to test different weapons and technologies, all under the auspices of, oh, well, it's, you know, just some of the freaky things that go on at Skinwalker Ranch. Haha, quirky. And I'm, of course, just touching on a few of the many, many strange occurrences and strange instances at Skinwalker Ranch. One of the other oddities is that people report hearing machinery deep underground. And I'm going to go pretty deep into conspiracy theory here. Maybe the reason that people hear machinery underground is that there's machinery underground. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Of all the things people are allowed to do when investigating at Skinwalker Ranch, all of the different organizations and entities that have owned this property, the one thing the government will not let them do is dig. Now, there's a lot of reasons the government won't let you dig, and generally it's power lines, sewage pipes, stuff underneath your own property. Pennsylvania has this whole, like, you know before you dig thing where you call a number and they tell you if you can dig on your own property. Fascists. So maybe it's something like that. But, you know, unless they're running some of the widest strips of power lines or telephone cables or oil pipelines under this 480-acre property that you can't dig anywhere, I think they're more likely hiding something. It seems to be a great possibility that the government, if they believed there was something paranormal here, some sort of nexus of strange energy or some magnetic anomaly, anything along those lines, it would make sense that they would want to study it, but it would be very hard to study that in plain sight. So it would make sense, if they believe that this is some sort of scientific thing that they can track, for them to underground build some sort of monitoring station to conduct all sorts of tests. This would explain why the government is so interested, why people are allowed to own the property who aren't the government, especially when it borders up against what is technically federally owned land, and why people hear machinery noises underground, and why the only rule that comes into play here is you can't dig. This may all sound like a lot of crazy conspiracies, but you've got to think about the fact that the government, when it was developing the nuclear bomb, would not tell people what they were working on. They would segment their engineers and tell them they were going to create and build specific parts of things. If you believe Bob Lazar, then when he went to work at Area 51, they gave him access to one specific piece of alien technology, and that was all he was allowed to work on. And the second he tried to come clean about it, they messed up his marriage with his wife, and they completely discredited the guy. There's other things to consider as well. There were documents that were declassified under the Trump administration that essentially admitted to the CIA killing JFK. And it got swept under the rug by the media because that wasn't something they wanted to talk about. There is the fact that Martin Luther King had letters sent to him by the FBI telling him to kill himself. The recent discoveries that there were US and Canadian boarding schools for Native American children where mass graves full of children have now been found. And as we know from Operation Paperclip, the US government really doesn't have a problem taking the most morally abhorrent people in the world and putting them to work on, NASA. Let's also think about MKUltra and the program where the CIA was dosing people with LSD to attempt mind control experiments, which in the end gave us Ted Kaczynski. The Unabomber. Crazy how the CIA gave us the Unabomber. And let's not forget that the CIA made up the moon. I'm kidding. The moon is real. Also, you may know about the Bay of Pigs disaster, and you may know about it from your US history course in high school, but you're probably remembering it as, that little mishap where we tried to invade the Bay of Pigs, and then we were like, that's silly, we should leave. That's not what happened. Lots of Americans died. It was a full-on invasion attempt, and to this day, most people think that we just sent some ships to Cuba, decided it wasn't worth it, and left. That is not what happened. So even when the government does things, and we know for a fact we have the evidence, we have the people who were there, when they do things and it doesn't go well, they will then proceed to use the education system to lie to you about what they did. And this is not meant to be some sort of anti-government rant. The US government has done plenty of good things for the world, and it's done plenty of bad things for the world. No government is perfect. But it's important to remember that there are actors within our government, within the UK government, the Russian government, the Chinese government, who are always going to be hiding things from us. And it is completely believable that they would be hiding something going on at Skinwalker Ranch. So, do you believe it was skinwalkers? Do you believe it's aliens? Are we talking about government research operations that we're not meant to know about? Any of these things are possible. We'd love to know what you think in the comments. If you like today's video, make sure to support us by liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell. Follow me at the Aidan Mattis on TikTok, or our editor, Aidan Thornbury, at Director Aidan on TikTok. I think it's the same on Instagram for both of us. That's also my Snapchat if you want to be involved in my personal life. So go ahead and do that. And if you really love this content and you want to help us grow, subscribe to our Patreon. The link is in the description. That is the best thing you can do. We have tiers from $1 through $25. And just this morning, I published an original short story that I wrote to our Patreon page. And there will be more content like that, as well as some patron exclusives, some chats that we'll be in, all sorts of things. So again, thank you for all the support, and we hope you enjoy all the content that you've seen and will see in the future. So that'll do it for today, guys. I'm Aidan Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge.